It's wonderful to be here, and as he said, I'm from Oklahoma, so I know that makes this year kind of iffy. I'm an OU fan, born and raised, so I'm looking forward to see how the SEC works out this year. But I'm here to talk about the museum, and so you don't have to stare at me. I did prepare a nice PowerPoint to talk about it. Now, obviously, the tower is very iconic on campus. If you've ever been to campus, you've seen it. Most people don't realize that the museum is inside. Of course, COVID kind of made it a little messy, but now that it's open and now that I've started and we've got someone full-time, the museum is working to change to get more students, more visitors. Right now, we are averaging about 450 students a month that come into this building. And the university has agreed to bring every tour that's on campus into the museum. And now, the lab school brings all of its 8th graders every year to the museum. So any student that is at LSU comes into this building and comes to see the museum. Now, this is just one of the wings. As Richard said, the building is gorgeous. They did an amazing job. The woodwork is absolutely beautiful. It's what everyone remarks about when they come in. The museum is top of the line. It was very well put together. Every exhibit is very well put together, and we are continuing to hold this standard for LSU and for its military history. So what I like to do with this presentation is not really talk about the museum, but rather talk about stories of people that we highlight in the museum. The one thing we are trying to do is not create a space where kids come in and they say, oh, I saw a helmet today. Instead, these students are coming in and going home and saying, oh, I learned this story today. So I've chosen several stories throughout LSU's history to highlight to you, and the majority of them are on display at the museum currently. So obviously, we'll start with the beginning. LSU first founded in 1860 as Louisiana State Seminary of Learning in Prairieville. Oh, Pineville, sorry, I'm still learning. As many may not know, our first superintendent was General William Tecumseh Sherman. He accepted the position with the idea that if something were to happen between the North and the South, he would leave. Within 6 months of him being at the university, the Civil War breaks out. He stays true to his word. He returns all the weapons to the state, and then he and a cadet go back home and go north. The rest of the cadets remain and end up joining the Confederacy throughout the war. Now, the original building burns, and after the Civil War, the cadets have been scattered and the country's trying to rebuild. But it's actually Sherman who really wants to rebuild the university. So he makes sure funds are channeled to the university. And this helps build what you now know as the Pentagon Barracks downtown next to the Capitol. All right, so the barracks were the school after the seminary. And it was under the control of David Boyd and Thomas Boyd. Now, the Boyd brothers had both taught at the school under Sherman, both joined the Confederacy, and in fact, David was captured by Union troops, and when he found out he was captured, Sherman told his men to bring David to him, and he remarked, "David, you're a better French teacher than you are a soldier, go home." So he sent David back, and David then rejoined the Confederacy, but they remained close friends. And LSU still holds a large archive of letters between Sherman and the Boyds as he helped to rebuild the university. Now, David Boyd was president while it was downtown, and under Thomas Boyd, the university moves from the Pentagon Barracks to where it is now. And the first building on LSU's current campus is our Memorial Tower. The tower is built in 1923 as the state's memorial to the dead of World War I. So when you walk in and you see the names, they were all those killed or died in service during the First World War. We also just learned about 2 months ago, and we cannot find any records, so this is brand new information, that the university is also built on a Union camp. It turns out that in the 70s, when they were doing some digging on the parade ground, they found hundreds of bullets and Confederate buckles and artifacts. So the university sits on top of a Union campground, and it's now part of our Civil War exhibit. Moving forward, World War I, obviously the university sends many troops, 30 students are killed, and they are now remembered in the Memorial Grove. So if you're ever on campus, behind the Student Union, in this beautiful grove, each tree was planted as a memorial to a student in World War I. And I'd like to highlight John Archer Lejeune. He attended LSU before going to Annapolis, then becoming a general of the 2nd Division in World War I, and then later Marine Corps Commandant. Now, on to one you probably all know, World War II. We're very proud of the fact that LSU fielded 16 generals, more than West Point and Texas A&M, I should point out. And of course, General Troy Middleton, who the library was named after, we still have an exhibit up to his service in the museum. But we try to highlight that you have many generals, you have great men that came out of the university. But we've asked current cadets, what would they like to see? What do they want to see in an institution that helps them connect? And they said the generals are great, but they don't feel like they connect with them. So instead, we're switching to focusing on stories of people that aren't generals. Of course, we have the generals in there, but we want to know the little stories, the privates, the people that we don't get to talk about very often. Now, of course, throw that, and then here's Chenault. We can't get away from Chenault with the Flying Tigers. If you didn't know, named the Flying Tigers because of Chenault's association with LSU. So another connection there. Now, Philip Larimore, some of you may know who he was. He taught at LSU for many years. He was a Boy Scout leader. We just recently put an exhibit up in our museum, and as many people may not know, Philip Larimore was actually one of the most decorated soldiers of World War II. He was also the youngest officer in the Army in World War II. He was 17 when he graduated OCS, and they had to wait 2 weeks for his birthday before they gave him command. Now, Larimore's story is quite impressive. He gets shipped to Italy as a second lieutenant, and at the time, the casualty rate for lieutenants was 2 weeks. So they were being replaced constantly. So Larimore shows up, instantly put in command, and within a year, just 1 year, he will be wounded 6 times. He only wore 4 of his Purple Hearts. He said 2 or 3 of them didn't count, so he only wore 4 of them. But he would be awarded 2 Bronze Stars, 2 Silver Stars, and a Distinguished Service Cross. And if any of you have ever heard the story of Audie Murphy, they were actually friends, they were in the same unit, and they were also both wounded at the same time, so they were bunkmates in the hospital, and had a competition going on who would get the most medals. At that point, Philip was winning, but Audie passed him later. Other stories we'd like to point out that are quite entertaining. We just found this uniform at LSU, so now it's on display, and it belonged to Bill Edwards. And we like to highlight that Bill Edwards played football for LSU with Leo Byrd, who was our quarterback. Both joined the Navy in World War II. And in the Pacific, Bill Edwards was in a submarine, the USS Finback. Leo Byrd was a pilot. And on one mission, Leo Byrd was providing escort, and on the way back, he saw another American pilot get shot down, bail out over the ocean. So Leo Byrd stayed in the air, he called it in, and the USS Finback showed up to rescue this pilot. Bill Edwards had a camera, so he videoed them pulling this pilot out of the ground. As it later turned out, they got to talking. The pilot remained on the submarine for 6 months, so they got quite close. But the pilot they saved is George H.W. Bush. So Bush and Bill Edwards become good friends, and when Bush runs for governor, Bill sends him this footage, and then he uses it in his campaign. They remained good friends, and then Bush came and opened the memorial at LSU in the 90s because of it. But 2 LSU cadets saved Bush. One that most of you should know, we had baseball last year, obviously, it's going well. Most people don't know the stadium is named after Simeon Alex Box. He was killed in North Africa in World War II. He earned the Distinguished Service Cross before his death, and the university thought that because of his career in baseball, the university should name the stadium after him. And I do understand it's ironic, before you notice, the only photo I have is him in a football uniform. All right, I know this. He played football for 2 years, he got injured, and then he switched to baseball. But unfortunately, we don't have a photo of him in a baseball uniform, so I know. Another name on campus, LaVille Hall. It's now the Honors College dorms, is named after Jermaine LaVille. She wanted to do her part and joined the Marine Corps in World War II. Unfortunately, a fire broke out in one of the barracks on the base she was at, and she went in to help other women get out. She was killed in the fire, becoming one of only 2 women Marines to die in service in World War II. So they named LaVille Hall after her. So we do have a few buildings named after military stories that most people just don't really realize. Moving on, we do have some humor in the museum. We have an exhibit on Charles MacDonald. He was the number 3 ace in the Pacific in World War II until he got in trouble. A celebrity wanted to come visit the troops, but the U.S. government wanted to keep it quiet because that would look bad if you allow celebrities to visit, and that celebrity is Charles Lindbergh. So Mac was tasked with getting Lindbergh to each location to speak to the troops, and on one routine flight over to another island, they were attacked by 2 Japanese Zeros, and in the fight, Lindbergh manages to shoot one down, Mac shoots the other one down, and when they land, he is chewed out for allowing a celebrity into a war zone and to get into a dogfight. So Mac is grounded, literally, as punishment. But the story was kept hush-hush until much later in his life when he finally told everyone what happened and how he got in trouble. But little stories like that pop up that are quite humorous throughout the museum. We also have a little exhibit on Mike, the spirit of LSU, a bomber that flew 4 missions in Germany before being shot down. The pilot and the nose gunner were both LSU grads. The pilot managed to escape when they crashed, and then he was captured by the Germans, put on a train. As he was being sent to a camp, that train was attacked by an American plane. It blew up, so he escaped a second time, made it all the way back to Allied lines, and then later in life returned to France to go thank the farmers that helped him escape. But we had Mike, the spirit of LSU, flying over Germany. We also have been trying to switch over to stories that most people don't think about. A museum exhibits artifacts, but the issue is these artifacts typically are from people that return from the war. You don't have things that come back from people who don't return. But recently, we've been receiving a lot of groupings from families of people that were killed in action. And so we're trying to highlight these stories in the museum as well. So Compton Hummel was a cadet. He graduated in 1939. He joined the Navy. When the war broke out, he was a pilot. He ends up earning, I think, 4 air medals, 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses. He's a very successful career all the way until 1945 when he's lost at sea after a storm. And his family had all of his letters, all of his photos, and gave them to us, which are now digitized, and we're letting students use them for research. We also like to tell stories that come in very recently. The Duvals, for instance. So Stanwood Duval and Claude Duval, both attended LSU, both joined the Marine Corps together, both somehow managed to get assigned to the same unit, and fought together in the 4th Marine Division throughout the war, ending on Iwo Jima, which is the photo on the right. It's both brothers on Iwo Jima. Both of them, Stanwood landed in the first wave on the beach. Claude was the third wave. Stanwood lost 80% of his unit. Claude the same. But both managed to survive. Both had each other. And the families have just recently donated quite a large collection, so we'll be able to highlight some of their stories. I should also point out they wrote memoirs, which are quite interesting to read because you can tell which one's the older brother and which one's the younger brother simply because Stanwood takes things really seriously and Claude doesn't. So when they talk about it, one instance which we like to highlight in the museum is on Saipan, Claude was sick and was given medicine and dug into a foxhole and fell asleep. And he slept the entire night with his brother next to him in another foxhole. But somehow Claude slept through the largest bonsai attack on Saipan. And when he awoke in the morning, his brother thought he'd been killed, so was very angry with him. But Claude thought it was hilarious. So there's quite a lot of little stories that we like to throw in. Speaking of Marines, we have Captain Jefferson DeBlanc. He is LSU's only Medal of Honor recipient. Unfortunately, his Medal of Honor is on display at the World War II Museum, and they won't let me have it. So, if you want to see his Medal of Honor, it is sitting at the World War II Museum on display, but he is an LSU grad. We've also started to reach out to people that are in more recent conflicts. When I started, we didn't have a lot from Vietnam, and now we're starting to get more collections from Vietnam all the way to the present. So, one of the stories I'd like to point out is Corporal Galen Manny. And I point him out because he gave us an artifact that I like to show students. He brought in a dog tag, and on his dog tag chain there was a bullet. And when I asked him about the bullet, he told me a story about the Battle of Hue, when he was a forward observer and he was going street to street, came around a corner face to face with the Vietnamese soldier. He pulled the trigger first, and he said all of his buddies wanted to know if he would take a souvenir. So he took the bullet out of his rifle and he said, well, this is the bullet that has my name on it, and as long as I keep it, they're not going to get me. And he made it through the rest of his deployment, returned safely. So now we have that bullet and the story, which we show the students that come in. I also like to point out Sergeant Johnny Jones. Now, Sergeant Johnny Jones joined the Marine Corps in 1951. He wanted to attend LSU, but because he was African American, he could not. And so he joined the Marine Corps. But he wanted to get an education, so he took correspondence classes. And during the Vietnam War, he started taking classes through LSU. And he said he would go on patrol and then come back to base and do his homework and then send that in. And so he took at least history from LSU while in Vietnam. When he returned, he got his degree, and then 2018, he returned to LSU to get his PhD, receiving it, becoming the oldest PhD recipient from LSU at 85, and unfortunately, he just passed away in November. But his wife came and gave us his photos and documents, so now it's a story we get to highlight in the museum because he was quite proud of his LSU connection. Of course, in LSU, our four-star General Hondo Campbell, we highlight because he started in Vietnam and continued on for over 40 years. To more recent stories. Now, Grant Stewart is one that is kind of it's sad, but it's a feel-good story, and we really like to talk about it at the museum. Grant Stewart was a cadet. He was an outstanding cadet, graduated in 1969, went into the Air Force, or 1968, went into the Air Force, goes to Vietnam, and he is shot down, killed in action over Vietnam. Now, last year, I get a phone call from a woman who said they were cleaning out her grandma's house, found her dad's uniform and letters, and wanted to donate it to the museum. So I asked some of our docents who were cadets at the Old War School if any of them had ever heard of Grant Stewart. And one of our cadets, Gary Kaiser, said, oh, I know Grant. He's my best man at my wedding. And I told him, well, his daughter's coming in on Saturday. So Gary came in on that Saturday and brought his daughter photos from his wedding, which you can see on the right, and got to talk about her dad. And it turns out the last letter he sent home was saying to his wife he just found out they had a baby girl and he was excited to see her, and then he's killed 7 days later. So she never got to meet her father, but through the letters and stories and everything, she feels much more connected. So we're going to do a story on Grant and his service and his letters. Now, with that story, when she came in, she brought her husband, Staff Sergeant Gary Carroll, who was also an LSU grad, and he served in Iraq. And so he donated his full uniform, a bunch of other items from his tour in Iraq, and some photos, which we find enjoyable because if you see, I know it's hard to see on here, but in between him, on their Bradley, is his helmet. And he had gotten his hands on the stickers the football players use, and he stuck them to his helmet, which apparently many of the officers from LSU would do. And so he wore the LSU Tiger throughout his entire deployment, and now the helmet is in the museum and will be part of an exhibit later this year. We also just put up a new exhibit trying to focus more on women in the military because we don't have a lot. So this is Rachel Sherburne. We put her up on homecoming because she's the only ROTC cadet to ever win homecoming queen. So she gave us her crown and her dress and her uniform. Once she graduated, she did a tour in Baghdad and then was in the Air Force for several years before becoming a missionary and doing missionary work with the armed forces. And then there she is in Iraq. And finally, it brings us up to today. We still get stories. There are thousands of stories from people out of LSU, but the problem is we don't know them. We don't have a list. We don't have a chart that tells me whoever graduated and joined the military. We don't have a list of the cadets that went into the military. All we get is people that call and say, hey, I was in the military, or my parents, my grandparents. So it's up to people coming to us, telling us the stories so that we can share them. The most recent story actually comes from a student who just graduated in December. She just had a deployment right before she graduated, but she brought us stuff because she was a doctor with the Army, and was sent to New York during COVID. So she was on one of those COVID missions to help with that. So she brought us her uniform and some of the items from when she was dealing with COVID. So the museum spans from 1860 until this very day. So if any of you have stories, have artifacts, or just want to know more about the university and its military history, we're open Monday to Friday, 10 to 3. And if you call, we can take tours. I'll open the museum on the weekends if people call and schedule it ahead of time. And I think I've given us enough time to have questions, if any of you have any. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yes, you mentioned that LSU produced the largest number of generals.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us how many officers, or did LSU produce, or over time, has created more commissioned officers than almost any other school?
I wish I had that number because it'd be fun to rub in the face of everyone else. But I don't have a number on any officers. The generals were able to find out because they kept record. But I know that we are in the top 3 with West Point, Texas A&M, and LSU.
It was A&M, I can't remember exactly.
Yeah, A&M and LSU and West Point have all been tied. And then 1969, when ROTC became no longer compelled for incoming cadets, that fell off. But we were up there, but I don't have a number because no one kept track of that.
You can't print the graduates?
No, because I don't know how they connect over. There's no pool. I've tried. I've contacted with ROTC, but there's no record of who went in, who didn't, or who commissioned, or it used to fall under that's private information I can't access. So we're working on it, and I'd love to have that list, but I don't know just yet. Yes, ma'am.
This is a very practical question, but I'm sure everybody has it on their mind. Do you have reserved parking for people to?
So, parking, always a great question. We do not. The university, there used to be parking in front of the museum, but that has since become open for faculty staff parking. So there is no immediate parking up front. The closest lot is on the corner of Highland and Dalrymple, and it's a pay lot, or there's the visitor lot behind the bookstore. Either way, they're a walk. So that issue is something I wish we had a better answer for, but no one has given us a good one. So it is an unfortunate walk, and it is difficult since the university is closed. We're trying our best, but during the school year, it's just an issue. Now, over the summer and the breaks, the museum is open, and those parking spots are open. So no excuses on not to visit during the summer. Yes, sir.
Do you know if General Lejeune, was Camp Lejeune named after him that's in North Carolina?
So Camp Lejeune was named after him, and 2 months ago, so my specialty is Marine Corps and World War I. So 2 months ago, I got a phone call from a reporter from New York who was doing an article on Camp Lejeune and arguing about how they pronounce it. And so he called LSU, of course I'm an Okie, but I've learned now, I understand it. And so the best answer I could give him was, it's pronounced Lejeune, and in fact, we'd argued over this for many years, and 2 years ago, we found footage that North Carolina has of General Lejeune in 1926 talking, but at the end of the video, his grandson shows up and he says, "Hi, I'm the grandson of General Lejeune." So that answered it right there. But the answer I gave the reporter was, I don't understand Cajuns either, but that's how they pronounce it. But yes, Camp Lejeune was named after John Archer Lejeune. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to mention Walt Laramore's wonderful book, At First Light.
Yes.
You had a wonderful exhibit there for him. When you opened the exhibit with Bill Laramore.
Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful book.
If you get a chance, Walt Laramore did put out a book about his dad's service called At First Light. It's absolutely wonderful, and it won a lot of book awards last year. And it's also on our display in the exhibit, so if you forget, it's there.
It does mention LSU.
Do what?
It does not mention Bill went to LSU.
Not until the very end, it mentions that he went, because he came in 1955, so it's later in his life. But it is mentioned in one sentence at the very end.
About that far from the end, so I
You're almost there. You're almost there. Now, it's the very, very end. Yes, ma'am.
Have you resolved your differences with the Middleton family over the documents that they wanted back?
So the issues with the Middleton was before I started. I started last May. But I can tell you that when I was in Oklahoma City, which is where I lived before I moved here, the 45th Infantry Museum is there, and I worked there. And so I visited the director, and I learned that the Middleton artifacts were taken from LSU, but they are now at the 45th Infantry Museum because he commanded the 45th. So I know the artifacts are safe. I've not spoken with the family, but as far as the museum is concerned, we still have our exhibit up to General Middleton. So we haven't taken down any of our exhibits, all of our information's still there. But the artifacts were returned, as I understand it, to the family, and then they took it to the 45th. But I know they are safe at another institution. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Do you have anything in your museum for my fellow Marine and Vietnam veteran, Ron Richard?
General Richard won't hand over the stuff yet. I've been working on it. I spoke with him just a couple weeks ago about that very topic. It's just getting him to pry open his hands and give us stuff. But I will. I absolutely will. Yes, sir.
Is the military circle of honor of LSU represented in the museum?
The Cadets of the Old War School Hall of Honor? Yes, sir. The names go on plaques inside the museum. So they're all there, and then all the documents related to it are through the museum. But that goes with the Cadets of the Old War School. So while we're technically two separate entities, we work hand in hand. Yes, ma'am.
How many students are currently in ROTC at LSU?
I think the overall total right now is 400, 600. They're trying to increase it to 1,200, I know that much. But now with the museum, we've been bringing every cadet class in, and they've been using, our connections with ROTC, they're using the museum more for a recruiting tool. And so we're getting more students coming in. So I know LSU's working on increasing it, but it's not where they want it to be just yet. But this weekend, the Pershing Rifles are having a big event on campus statewide, so we'll have the museum open for all of them to come in and realize that they went to the wrong school, so they should change. Any other questions? Oh, over there.
Have you done any outreach to high school or OTC?
I've reached out a little, but I'm also still trying to learn which universities have JROTCs, but I also don't want to step on the feet of the ROTC, so I'm trying to work with them so that they can reach out and then use us as a tool for them. But the ROTC is getting a new building in 2 years, or moving to a new building on campus, and part of that discussion has been an ROTC museum, which I will then run as well. So they've given us a space to have our museum in the tower and a museum for the cadets in their new building that also spans all 3 floors. So we're working on making sure the military history is scattered throughout the whole university. Any other questions? Oh, no more. Come visit the museum, come see what we've got, and please let me know if you have anything or any stories you'd like to add. Thank you.